Welcome to the Get Safe Guardians Perspective podcast, where we go out and try to meet interesting people that are doing great things for their community and find out what we can learn from them. Today is no exception. I've got an incredibly interesting guest that has a very diverse background, but I'll let him spill the beans on what it is that his experience is. But Joe Auriemma, I'm gonna bring you in and welcome to the podcast, man. Tell me about yourself.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So, like you said, I was with the state police for 24 years in New York. Just retired this past October. Had a great career. Loved it. Did a lot of really unbelievable things. Things that when people like my children or my friends will talk about it, they're shocked that somebody in law enforcement would get to do some of the things I got to do. Which really helped me to where I am today with life after the job and traveling the country teaching. So while I was with the state police, I obviously started out as a uniform trooper. Like all agencies, New York State Police is a full service agency. So we did everything from highway interdiction, traffic stops, drug interdiction, crimes against persons, all of that. So I started out as a uniform trooper, learned the ropes. About 6.5 years. I eventually was promoted to what we call investigator or detective. Went immediately to a child advocacy center, so doing crimes against children. Spent 2 years in that unit. I got to say, those 2 years were some of the best learning experiences for me when it comes to conducting interviews and interrogations. It really helped me start to cut my teeth into that component of law enforcement. And it's really when I decided that that's the job I wanted to do and I wanted to be as good at it as I could be. So from there, I eventually went to what we call a back room, so a detective squad, where I worked cases, burglaries, assaults, sexual assaults, homicides. And eventually from there, I was asked to join one of our major crime squads. And we have one in each of the troops throughout New York State. And so in the troop that I worked in, Troop F, the Hudson Valley part of New York, I went there for 6.5 years. So that was just high profile political corruption, homicides, kidnapping cases. And while there, I became a polygraph examiner. Also, during my career, I became a crisis negotiator, hostage negotiator, depending on where you work, how you call it. And as I progressed through my career, I was blessed enough to end up being one of two people that oversaw the New York State Police polygraph program. We had 39 examiners at the time that I left. And at the time I left, this past October, the New York State Police was doing more pre-employment criminal examinations than any other agency in the country. So it's a phenomenal program. While I was there, I developed an entirely new way of conducting exams, the post-polygraph interviews. We integrated investigative interviewing into that, changed the testing format, and a whole new policy and procedures to include quality control procedures, something I was really proud of, definitely bringing the state police out into the forefront in that area. I was also an instructor at the New York State Police Academy for over a decade. So I taught investigative interviewing, de-escalation, crisis intervention. And I was also asked to teach at the New York State Preparedness Center in Oriskany, which does training for all of New York State police agencies for things like crisis intervention and de-escalation.
It's awesome. So I want to start with the polygraph stuff because I've got, based on my background, I've been through several polygraphs for various capacities because I was in military intelligence, and with that comes the need for polygraphs. So
Right.
is every polygraph the same?
So do you mean every polygraph examination? Or
So is there different levels of is there just all right, this is an interview all the way up to, what you see on TV where they're cameraing your eyes to check your pupil dilation?
Right. So there are various modalities that are out there that will sell themselves or advertise themselves as the ability to detect deception or determine somebody's truthfulness. There's programs like Eye Detect, which does exactly like you talked about, where it's looking at pupil response. That is used in pre-employment testing, so it's not been brought into criminal aspect. And there's always pros and cons to everything. But as a polygraph examiner, where we actually connect components to the body where we're monitoring the physiological reactions that occur, inside. These reactions occur when there's a stimulus, a response to a reaction to a perceived threat, right? So how I can explain it to someone who's not familiar with a polygraph would be fight or flight. If you've ever been in a situation where your body reacts to that fight or flight, let's say, for instance, you're walking on a bike path and you come around the corner and there's a 200-pound Rottweiler standing in the middle of the bike path, right? There's going to be a reaction. Like, if you're not comfortable around dogs and you don't know that dog, there's going to be a very quick thought process in your mind. Am I going to stand here and hope to see the owner and it's a friendly dog, or am I going to turn and run, right? So that's that fight or flight reaction that the body has during a perceived threat. So the polygraph examination, very simply, is that we're monitoring the physiological reactions that occur inside a person when we're asking them questions. And if those questions become threatening to the person, right? If there's a perceived threat, in other words, if when they hear the question, there's a reaction to that question that starts to point us in a direction that perhaps it has something to do with them being deceptive. Now, again, we're not going to go too deep dive in this. Polygraph is not 100% accurate. Where I feel polygraphs are important, both in pre-employment and in criminal examinations, are the examiner interviews, the pre-interview and then subsequently the post-polygraph, interview. Really having the opportunity to talk to the person and hear the reason why, like ask them questions as to why they feel the way they do or why they're reacting to a question. It's not outside the realm of possibility that the question is upsetting to someone. If you're talking to somebody who's been accused of inappropriately touching a child, they may not have done it. It could have been a false accusation, and just being accused of that could facilitate, a reaction. And so we don't want our reaction to now look like they're being deceptive. We have to be professional in our trade and be able to look beyond just what the instrument is telling us, but also have a conversation and really dive into that conversation and do it well to ascertain, is this a reaction that I myself might have to being accused wrongfully, or is it, something else?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when we talk about we teach de-escalation. I don't know if you how well aware you are what we do, but when we do de-escalation, we cover the 5 areas that generally cause an escalation, and that's like safety, embarrassment, control, having a voice, and achievement. And when any of those 5 things are threatened, you tend to see that fight, flight, or freeze response, which is essentially the same thing that you're talking about. Is that can cause somebody to have a signature reaction on your machine, right?
Yeah, on the instrument. Yes, absolutely. This is why we can have things like false positives. People can take a polygraph examination, and again, what I'm saying here right now isn't, I'm not, pulling back the curtain to something that I shouldn't be talking about, like not like a magician, giving away trade secrets. This is the reality of what we're talking about, is that it is possible that someone can take a polygraph examination and it appears, based on what the instrument is showing us, that they're being deceptive. And the reality is, they are actually telling the truth. It's just that reaction now has to do with one of these things that we're talking about. So a properly trained professional examiner understands that. And we do not rely solely on the instrument. We don't go into a polygraph examination, administer the test, and say, okay, the instrument is saying you're lying, and then go out and say, yep, they're lying. There's much more to it, but it is an instrument that we use. If used properly, if used by a properly trained professional polygraph examiner who understands, how to conduct a pre-test and post-test interview, because that is part of the polygraph examination. It is definitely a tool worthy of continuing being in law enforcement, both as a pre-employment examination process and criminal exams.
That's interesting. So the pre-question interview or the pre-test interview, I've only experienced in law enforcement. When I was in the military, I don't remember a interview beforehand. They just kind of set you in and strap you up, and then they start asking you a bunch of questions, and then eventually they start yelling at you, and then and
Yeah,
then they
so
tell you that you're a horrible liar, and then get out of my
exactly.
office. And it's like, oh, I have no idea really what happened here, but
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna end up getting hate mail or people are gonna be reaching out and be like, man, what are you doing, Joe? But so there are differences between like federal tests, like the military, FBI, any of the special services that conduct these types of exams. They're going to be doing a different set of exams than you would necessarily see like New York State Police conducting. Right? We don't run the same type of exams for I don't want to say obvious reasons, but what we're looking for are different things. And so, in a federal exam, they might have you answer some questions 2 or 3 days before, or maybe 20 minutes before your test, and then they're just going to jump right into your test based on those answers. And in that environment, when I'm talking about some of these federal agencies, it's like a one-shot deal. And I got to be honest, I respect them for it. They tell you right out of the gate, we want you to be 100% truthful, answer these questions honestly, and tell us everything. And so now they ask you to go do that. If you do, and then you jump right into the exam, then you will do well. But if you are withholding information, then you're not going to do well, like you just said, And so the point from the federal side, historically has been, we're going to move on to the next person. We gave you the opportunity to tell the truth. We're not going to now start talking about why did you not tell the truth. Now tell us the truth. We asked you one time, you didn't do it. We're going to move on. And what I can tell you from the New York State Police standpoint is that we understand why people lie. Some of the things that we are talking about are not comfortable topics, and they're talking about it with strangers. And so it is not outside of the normal course of our lives for us to withhold information or to minimize things when we talk to people. And we recognize that. And so we don't want to miss out on hiring a good applicant because when they came in, they just couldn't tell us this one thing or maybe even two things that may not have actually hindered them being employed, but in their mind, they thought it did. So now you get that problem where it's like the issue isn't something we're concerned about, but your lying is. And so now we have to decide, right? Okay, you lied about it. So now moving forward, you become a police officer, you make a mistake, we confront you on it. What do? Are you going to lie to cover it up, or are you going to stand tall and say, I made a mistake and let me make it right? And so that's the fine line in that. And so that's where I think you'll see the difference from a federal level to local law enforcement.
One of the things we used to say, I think both in law enforcement and military, it's like, it's not necessarily what you've done, but what you've told them that you've done. And it's the things that they find that you didn't tell them that causes a
Yeah.
problem.
Listen, I have seen police officers get fired for the lie, not the
The
wrongdoing.
act. Yeah, that's
So
and that's it, and I don't know what the solution to that is. Maybe we have a better, front loading communication. Like, look, this is the reality of the situation. You have control over this, or you have the consequence of this afterwards. I want to. So I was on your website last night. The advancedstrategicommunications.com, and I'll show the website towards the end. But some of the things that are bulleted on the homepage, I really stood out to me, and I wanted to ask you about that. The first thing is the DISC personality assessment. Can you cover and I don't want you to give the secret family recipe away for this. But I think it's interesting enough that people would want to hear about it. And so,
sure.
by all means, could you go
Yeah,
into a little
absolutely.
bit what that is?
So personality assessments have been around since the 1920s. And, you know, the thing about personality assessments is there's such a great benefit in personal encounters with people, and not just inside law enforcement, especially law enforcement, but even outside. I mean, even in your own personal lives, with your spouse or your family members, people always say like, hey, listen, I didn't get along with this person, that person, personalities didn't match, or, I don't like that person's personality, or I'm a type A personality or something like that. So, we hear those things, but do we really understand what we're saying? I mean, sometimes it's the difference between the theoretical, like let's take academic and understand what that is versus like what's happening in the real world. Why do I feel this way? So with like any kind of personality assessment, the idea here is that rapidly you can ascertain somebody's personality by the way they're saying things. So understand like when you like a traffic stop, you walk up to a car in a traffic stop. There are things that you could be looking for as you're approaching the car that can give you some signs as to the type of personality of the operator. Now, keep in mind that would apply to is the vehicle owned by the person driving the car, right? So if I'm driving your car, Brad, then you have a bumper sticker on the back, that might not apply to me. But if it's my car, there are things about that car that will help the officer on the approach very quickly start to get my personality. And why that's important is depending on your personality type, there are needs that you have for you to be able to be in a conversation where there can be actual communication, active listening, right? Some people walk up to a car, police officers walk up to a car, hey, how are you? You know, New York State Police, I need your license registration. And then the next thing that you hear from the operator is, why'd you pull me over? And then the officer's like, well, I need your license registration. And I'll tell you, no, why'd you pull me over? Well, give me your license. And now what's happening? We're escalating, right? I mean, before
Yep.
we've even got to that. So, you know, many agencies, I mean, some states now are even passing laws where the officer has to notify the operator why they're being stopped. And I'll tell you right now, I think it's a great idea because it doesn't hurt anything, right? I mean, if we're going to talk about maybe a sovereign citizen who's not going to hand over their license, it doesn't matter if you tell them why you stopped them or not, they're still not going to hand it over. But somebody else, somebody who has the personality, who is very analytical and just needs to know the why, if when you walk up to the car, you recognize that they might be this, let's say, D personality as we assess it, and you walk up to the car and you say, good afternoon, Joe Auriemma, New York State Police. The reason why I stopped you is you're going 45 to 30-mile-an-hour speed zone. If you could give me your driver's license registration, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Well, immediately, what have we done? We've started to de-escalate. We've given them some information. And listen, nothing's always going to work. Nothing is perfect. But depending on the personality, someone might be like, okay, I don't think I was speeding, but here, and it's a different scenario.
Yep.
So teaching how to read personalities, you know, applies to patrol officers on the road. It applies to detectives, investigators when they're conducting interviews of victims, witnesses, suspects. You know, understanding how someone might react. You know, Brad, I mean, if you're dealing with somebody who's been the victim of a sexual assault and you want to talk to them, you know, you need to understand that we can't just sit down with a person and say to them, tell me what happened. You know, you don't know how they're going to, they might be in some type of state, you know, some acute state at this moment where they're not even able to process everything that's happened, let alone communicate with you. And the other side of that, Brad, is that if we do start talking quickly, how accurate and reliable is the information that we're getting? Have they had a chance to process it? You know, we have
Good
to
point.
understand, right? That you know, the way we process some of this information, you know, we need to let them come down from that escalated point to where they can start to think rationally and actually tell us what's happening. And so knowing some information about somebody's personality is a really great tool for law enforcement officers to use, and it's a rapid assessment, and it gives them a starting point. You know, because I'll tell you, Brad, I've been all over the country training. You know, I'll always get that question is you know, well, how do you start? How do you start this conversation, or how do you start this interview? And you know, what I tell people is the first thing you got to do is build some rapport, right? And
Sure.
so, and if you're building rapport, having the ability to decide or look at somebody's personality very quickly, right? I mean, there's four, you know, D, I, S, and C. That's why they call it the DISC personalities. If you can, you know, get yourself even close to one, you know, one group of, because they kind of group up, you'll see when you dive into it when I teach it. But if you say, hey, you know, I think this person might be a C, you know, and I'm going to go with what I know a C needs when I'm talking to them. You know, here's the thing: if they're actually an S, you're not doing something that's going to escalate an S person. You know, a person who's an S is going to need some things that a C also needs, but it's not going to be the same as a D. You know, so not to get too far into it, because like you said, you don't want to give away, you know, all the
Sure.
secrets.
No, that's fine.
Understanding someone's personality is a great tool for law enforcement, again, from patrol all the way up, to help facilitate obtaining accurate, reliable information. It helps more positive citizen encounters. And, you know, that part of the policing where we're constantly being told we need to do a better job, which is, you know, how we communicate with the people we're interacting
Look, you were you're retired. You spent 24 years in the job. We go around the country. We teach de-escalation to whoever wants it. And one of the things that I think is so bizarre, and this is, you know, feel free to interject if I'm speaking out of school, but we have so much evidence at this point to show that the um, processes of a hostage or crisis negotiator, when implemented correctly, lead to more success in every aspect of law enforcement, on the street with citizens, in interviews with suspects, with victims, with witnesses, internally between coworkers and supervisors and managers. The things that you're talking about are implemented when done well, create success. Why is it that the basics of, hey, my name is Officer Young, the reason I stopped you for this, blah, 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 has to be legislated into practice. Why isn't it just understood that, hey, look, this is what works? I do not. It blows my mind to think that we have to create laws and regulations to get people to do the thing that works the most successfully.
Yeah,
It's mind numbing to
yeah,
me to that point because George Thompson, the verbal judo guy, that was part of his both 5-step and 7-step parts or process. Hey, this is who I am. This is why I stopped you. When we teach de-escalation, this is front loading and clarifying a role. These are all of the things that are critical to creating that position of rapport, not a position of that's imbalanced where you're going to create this escalation. So I think it's great what you're doing. I have got a lot more questions for you for the disc stuff, but we'll talk offline about that because I don't want you to give away the secret sauce. Um, Now, the other thing I saw on your website is teach to talk. What is teach to talk?
okay. So teach to talk is a I'll call it a method, and it's trademarked. It's something I've built and designed over years. One of the things that when I teach, now all over the country, is I tell the students, listen, this is evidence-based, research-backed training that I'm giving you. Like some of the stuff is open source. You can go find it. Some of it is not. Teach to Talk being one of them. But the idea here is that there is a better way for us to talk to people. There is. Like some of the ways that we have been doing it even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, have been shown to not be conducive to having us obtain accurate, reliable information. What I'm talking about is the difference between an accusatory interview or interrogation and a non-accusatory. And we're not going to talk about specific methods. I'm not here to talk badly about other methods. Every method has some merits within it, but what I have developed over the years is taking different modalities that I know work based on research, based on evidence, based on studies that work. So for instance, we take the peace model, which has been around since the 70s. Started over in Europe. And that's the basis for planning. Your in preparation and different things that you learn that you need to do before you even begin to talk to somebody. So you take that peace model and then you start to incorporate it with some cognitive interviewing skills, understanding how the human brain works, helping people pull those memories out. Then you take a little bit of behavioral analysis, how somebody is saying what they're saying. Again, somebody looking up and to the left doesn't mean that they're a liar, right? But if you start to learn how to take these behaviors and watch them and see if they change, right, from homeostasis, then you start to say, why is there a change right now? This new topic, something's different. Why is it different? There's a reaction that's happening right now. So what Teach to Talk is it's a way that I developed where I teach the students how to enter into a conversation. And I'll tell you from my own experience, when I first started learning how to conduct interviews, basically they tell you go in the room, and honestly, Brad, many times they say to you, hey man, go in the room and get a confession. You're like, okay, boss. So here's the problem with that. What if the person in the room didn't do it? If the person in the room didn't do it and you have a police officer that just say, hey, go in there and get a confession, I want to make my boss proud of me. I want to make my coworkers think I'm skilled and qualified. So I'm like you said, I'm coming with the thunder right now. I'm gonna get you to confess.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
that is why the Innocence Project exists. And that is why there are people in prison who have confessed to crimes that they did not commit. And Brad, if you think about what it would take for you to say you murdered somebody that you didn't, there are people in prison that exact thing has been proven happened. They confessed and they didn't commit the crime. It's mind blowing to think about, but if you really start to look at it, it starts to make you realize the importance of how important the way we communicate is, right? So Teach to Talk is a method where we teach the students how to enter into the conversation, how to start the conversation out. It starts to build rapport. It allows you to show some empathy, which is extremely important. And these are skills, actual skills that we teach, that we show them, hey, listen, here's what you're going to do. Here's how you're going to start the conversation. Brad, again, like you said, you don't want to give away the sauce. Like something as simple as when you walk in the room, right? You walk into a normal interview room in a police station, right? There's 2 chairs and a desk in the middle, right? And so the person that's being interviewed goes in the really crappy metal chair in the back, and then there's the table, and then the detective sits in the nice leather chair with the wheels, right?
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
we've all seen that room. We've all seen it. You go to any police agency in the country, unless they've started to make these changes, that's what you're going to see. And here's the problem with that. What we're saying out of the gate is that you're less than, I am better than you, I'm in charge, I'm more powerful. All these things that psychologically we're trying to say to the person. And again, some of this does come from training. But the problem with that is that are we now two people that are trying to get to the truth here? Or are we somebody who's got this cognitive bias who I know you're guilty and I'm just going to stand here till you tell me what I need to know? So teach to talk is a method where we start right out from the way you introduce yourself, how you help set the room up with the person, the way in which you communicate. It's open. There's not going to be a table in between. And we're actually going to teach the person how we want them to communicate with us. There are things that we're going to show them to do where we're going to actually have this person answering questions and we're going to walk them through this process. So before we even start to ask them questions, simple questions like, this, that, or the other, tell me about yourself. Tell me where you were on Saturday night. Do you know that? We're going to show them exactly how we want the questions to be answered. And the importance of that, Brad, is that for the person that comes in the room who wants to be helpful, who does want to, tell us the truth, who wants to, be honest, like we just mentioned earlier, everyone lies, even truthful people, right? They're going to hold things back. So we teach to talk. When you start to have a truthful person who's withholding information, the person trained in teach to talk is going to recognize it. There's a change. And what's great about teach to talk is there's this contract that you enter into with the interviewee, and you very simply can bring them right back to say, hey, Brad, remember earlier when we were talking about, and you go, yeah. Okay, so just now we lost a little bit of that detail. So what I would like to do is, and then we teach them this method of going back into that question, not accusatory. I'm not saying, hey, you just lied to me, but it brings that person in a place where they're like, wow, this person is trying to help me remember. They're not accusing me of being a liar. So for victims and witnesses, it's phenomenal. But the value with suspects is almost immeasurable because, what happens with law enforcement is they start to push because the person's lying. The next words out of that person's mouth is lawyer. And that's what we're trying to prevent, right? Because listen, maybe they didn't do it. Yeah. Right. So we got to get away from the confirmation bias of saying, hey, this person did it, they're guilty, and I'm going to get you to confess. What I want people to know is I want to go in the room. I want to get accurate, reliable information. And if it turns out they're lying and they did it, great. But if it turns out they're not lying, then I want to know that because I need to go look at the next person on my list. So teach to talk is this method that teaches them how to do that in a non-accusatory way.
That's really great. You said you made a good point. I just want to clarify this point is when somebody says, I want my lawyer. Now, realistically, that's not a bad idea. However, it does with it come this idea that, oh, you did it. Anytime there's this understanding that if somebody lawyers up, that they automatically it's presumed that they did it. So it's an interesting perspective to keep people like take care of yourself. Like this is important.
Listen, Brad, I'm not going to be a hypocrite here with you in this conversation. I'll tell you right now, if somebody were to come to knock on my door right now and want to talk to me about some alleged crime, I'm going to ask for a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? No, I mean, I tell my children I'll be honest and tell you that in my class, it's a great point you just brought up. I tell the students, listen, just because someone asks for a lawyer doesn't mean they did it. And then I'll say, hey, listen, if your son was being accused of a crime and the police wanted to talk to them, would you freely bring him to the police station and let him talk? And not a single person that I've ever taught has gone, yes. They've all gone, no, to get a lawyer. I said, so that's okay, but they want a lawyer and they're guilty. So right. I agree 100%. The idea here is I don't want to make this person feel like they need a lawyer. I want them to feel like, listen, we're going to have a conversation. Now, we might be in a situation where we're going to have given them Miranda. We're not talking about not giving Miranda when it applies for a suspect. Right. So we're going to have known their rights. But the idea here is I want you to have the opportunity to tell me your side of the story, why, your name came up, why you're a suspect, person of interest, whatever. And again, part of what I teach is allowing that person to tell me why. So many times I see police officers and detectives shut people down when they start to talk about the why. I don't care why. My goodness, yes. You know what? Listen, that might be all they need to feel is that you'll listen to why they did it. And when they start to tell you why they did it, Brad, guess what else they're telling you? They did it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when I say that, we want to try to prevent them from asking for a lawyer. We're not trying to prevent them from having the right to a lawyer. We want them to feel like, listen, this is a different type of interview. It's non-accusatory. I'm open to the idea that maybe you're not guilty. Or if you're a victim, maybe, I don't think you're lying. I want to believe you're telling the truth, but I'm going to ask some questions just to make sure that that happens. Because Brad, law enforcement officers know victims will come in and make false reports. It
It's
happens,
true.
right? And witnesses will lie because they're trying to be helpful, and they'll think that they're being helpful by telling us wrong information. So teach to talk is a method that allows us to have a non-accusatory conversation where the goal is to get accurate, reliable information, and we turn that information into evidence. And if the evidence is that this person isn't guilty, then great. We shake hands and we send them on their way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that that last piece is something that also has to be said is like, hey, just if you didn't do it, you didn't do it, and then you'll
Right,
be on your way. But if you did,
right,
then there's obviously other things that
right.
have to happen. Now, uh, not to, I don't want to, dissuade anybody from taking this, so I have to ask it, but I do want to ask this question. Does Is there a certain amount of IQ or EQ that a person has to have in order to be able to utilize this program effectively, or can just anybody on the street walk in, take it, and then walk out
No,
knowing how to do it?
no, great question. Great. Listen, if I can use it, and I've used it successfully for years, if I can teach it, you can use it. This is not complicated. Well, police officers don't like complicated things, right? Keep it simple,
Sure.
stupid. Like this is our mantra. This is if it's complicated, they're not going to want to use it. If it's hard to learn, they're never going to use it. If this is something they're going to take a class, write some notes, stick it in a book, and put it away, there's no value. This is something that if I teach it to you on a Monday night, if you're working an overnight shift, or Tuesday morning, you're going to be able to flow right into using it. And part of the training we do is we do scenario based. It is all
Perfect.
hands-on scenario based training. So they're going to have used it before they even go back out on patrol or back to their detectives bureau. But this is not difficult, complicated stuff. It doesn't require, frankly, I'll be honest with you. Many of the things that are incorporated in Teach to Talk are things officers are doing. The problem is they're not doing them to the full effect, or they're not doing them at the right time. That you'll see that where they'll
Yeah.
put it in either too early or it's too late. They didn't see the signs. And then there are certain aspects of this that are, like proprietary, like I said, trademarked, where it's these new techniques. And when they see them, they go, so much easier, and they see the benefit of it. And again, if we had to make this hard, it wouldn't work. A patrol officer on a traffic stop doesn't have a lot of time. A patrol officer going to a domestic trying to get information, it's quick. This is, and their calls are backed up. So what we don't want to have happen is we don't want them taking a shortcut. Officers need to get accurate, reliable information just like detectives do. And I've talked to chiefs of police and heads of training, and their complaint is that officers are taking shortcuts because the calls are backed up,
Yeah.
and then it just trickles. And I said, that's absolutely true. How many times are you going back to the same address? How many
That's
times in
true.
the same shift are you going back? So let's address it the first time properly. And if this is
Yeah.
going to add an extra 2 minutes, but give you accurate, reliable information so you can have some closure to the case, that's the win. And that's what we're seeing happening. So no, it's not a difficult thing to learn at all.
On that point of going back to the address, like my first agency, I made corporal before I left to go somewhere else, and it was drilled into my head as a young street cop, handle the problem, but if the address comes back up during this shift and the sergeant has to go out there, that's a problem, right? So there I am. I just cleared FTO in my second agency, and I'm working by myself. And this agency was huge. So we covered 2 counties of regional parkland, which was great for the proactive cop because there's all sorts of stuff to do. Um, I was working the morning shift, and it comes in as like, hey, we've got this issue out at this place. This is the third time today. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, how is this the third time today? All right, you know what? I'm going to go out there. I'm not the supervisor. And this isn't a knock on the supervisor because literally there was like 7 cops for 2 counties that we covered. And I showed up, and one of the officers that was there both times before was like, there's not a whole lot that we can do. But this is where I'm going to use this as a transition point. doing the small things well makes the hard things easier, and it solves problems faster. And I said, "What are you talking about? This guy is clearly bipolar basing on his behavior that we're just watching for a few minutes. He is clearly a danger to others because he's swinging what looked like a tree trunk trying to hit people on the beach.
Right.
He meets the criteria for a mental health hold. Whether
Right.
he wants to go or not, it's involuntary. You have the probable cause to put him on the hold. Let's be the police and put him on the hold so that nobody gets hurt." And it ended up being a very good learning point, to the point where the officer was like, "Man, I didn't see any of that." So having the ability to actually communicate, uh, and establish that probable cause of a mental illness to a danger to self or others is hugely important. So that way, 5150 in California or any kind of psychiatric hold doesn't become like a band aid. It actually becomes a solution oriented problem solving technique. Now, earlier, like we kind of talked last night, and I was telling you before we got started, I was laughing because you had made a comment about some of the videos that we've been posting, being having grammatically correct and having spelling correctness. And then this morning, one of the videos that posted on our Instagram, I had to make words that aren't spelled correctly, and just to keep them from getting watered down in the AI algorithm. And I was laughing at that, and I told you about it earlier, before we got started. It's like, don't look at it; you're going to change your perspective. It's just, and then you started talking about like report writing and how important that is and how it's a thing. So let's, although I do want to get into the forensic interviewing stuff, because I thought that'd be a good transition. But you had said doing the easy things well, like writing a report, matters. So let's talk about why precision matters, especially when it comes to documentation.
Sure. So one of the things that I teach in my class is called note taker. I teach a method of taking notes to patrol officers and detectives. It's a phenomenal method. Everyone that's ever learned it has always said to me, "I wish I had this, 10 years ago. I wish I had this when I was in college." Um, because here's what happens, right? Taking notes is difficult. We most people will take a lined piece of paper. They'll start on the first line, upper left hand side, and they'll start taking notes, talking to people. And if you and I are talking, Brad, and we're taking notes, what am I doing? I'm looking down at my piece of paper. So I've no longer made eye contact with you. I mean, let's not even talk about an officer safety issue if it's a patrol officer on the side of the road, right? I mean, the world I come from, we had Stetsons. If you got out of the car, you wore your Stetson. For people that don't understand what that is, it's a cowboy hat, right? So if my head is down and I'm writing on a piece of paper and the brim of my Stetson comes to here, well, guess what I can't see? Anything out here in front of me, where the bad guy or girl's arms are, hands are, or anybody that might be in the vehicle. So the method that I teach actually allows them to maintain eye contact and very quickly just write down some key words that allow them to work with the way the brain works. And how that flows into what you're asking me is our notes matter. I go to agencies and they're like, "Oh, well, we have body cameras." That's fantastic. Body cameras are phenomenal. I think every agency should have them. I think detectives should have them. I'm a big proponent of body cameras because I think there's a huge benefit to it. But here's my problem with a body camera. If a patrol officer goes to the scene of an accident, a homicide, an assault, any crime, and they're interviewing people, and then the detectives show up, however quickly they get there, depending on the agency and the patrol area, 10 minutes, half hour, 45 minutes later, and they say to the patrol officer, "Hey, tell me what you got." Well, guess what you can't do? You can't pull the body camera off of the patrol officer, turn it over to the back where there's a little screen and hit play.
It's
Right?
true.
We all know those body cameras have to go back to the station. They have to be docked, uploaded, and put into the program. Well, we're not doing that. So I need you to tell me right now all the information that you have, and it better be accurate. It better be reliable. Well, then guess what that means? It means I'm going to my notes. And most police officers' notes look like they'd be great doctors because they can't even read them. I've seen police officers go, "I have no idea what I wrote here." Well, okay,
That's what my
so
notes look like.
exactly, right? So the problem here is that I have learned over the years is that what we write, the actual information we obtain, is important. How we write it is just as important. And later, when somebody goes to look at it, when you go to testify in a grand jury, when you go to testify in a suppression hearing, when you go to testify during a jury trial, they might play the video of that moment in time. And then the attorney, the defense attorney, the prosecutor, they might start asking you questions. And what's going to happen is the officer is going to go, "I'd have to refresh my recollection." Well, they're not going to play the video again. They're going to say, well, is there someplace you can go to do that? And the officer is going to say, my notes. So now they're going to hand them their notes to look at briefly to refresh their recollection and hand them back. And if they don't know where to find the information, if it is not articulated properly, that's a problem. Now take that to your reports, right? Officers are always complaining. My shift goes right to the end. They're not going to pay me overtime. Now I got to take these reports, dock my body camera, upload all this video. I don't have time. Well, I've seen situations where 6 months later, an officer now has to go and testify to something, and the poor quality of their report, misspelled words, poor grammar, flipping names. You have like Bill Smith and Phil McDonald now became, Phil Smith and Bill McDonald, right? Which, well, that's not a big deal. It's a grammatical error. Yeah, the problem is defense attorney now is going to go and turn that around on you. And what's going to start happening is there's going to be these questions. So, trooper, officer, detective, do you normally make mistakes when you write your reports? No, I don't. Okay, so just on this day, you made a mistake. So then it just starts to come into question the quality of your work, right? And for patrol officers that want to be promoted to a position as a detective or an investigator, those bureaus are looking for people who are going to be able to write a good report, tell the story. And that even leads into search warrants, for detectives and investigators that are typing search warrants, which, is something that's done on the daily from officers across the country. You have to be able to articulate to a judge probable cause to go and seize evidence from inside someone's home, their car, whatever. And if you can't properly write that, so the person reading it, it's almost like, hey, if I read this, I want to feel like I was there, like it's a movie playing in my mind. So it's extremely important to have good grammar. It's extremely important to care about your spelling and how because it's actually, I'll tell you as a supervisor, it tells me a lot about that officer's commitment to their trade. Do they care enough in even that small task? Because it's not small when you look at the big picture, so that it applies into other things that they do, right? So I'm a big stickler on that. We talked about, like you said, last night and this morning. I think it matters. And if there's ways that it doesn't add time, because I know time is valuable. I mean, nowadays, retention and recruitment are the two biggest issues in law enforcement. Everyone is retiring and all the officers are new. So they, officers nowadays, Brad, where are the 20-somethings spending their time communicating? They're right here, right? They're in here. Yep. So now we need them to be here. So that's why the programs that I've designed and built for decades and with evidence-based research help officers and detectives get that quality work, get that accurate, reliable information, turn it into evidence, get good closure rates. The prosecutors are really appreciative of it, but it doesn't make it longer or harder. And in fact, in some situations, it actually shortens their time because they're just doing it right the first time instead of having to have the reports kicked back, redo them, or go over. I mean, listen, I'm not saying this has ever been done, but, Rosario, if somebody takes notes on their notepad and they can't read them, I'm not going to say that I haven't heard stories where an officer might go back later and rewrite the notes. Now, I understand that that's not what's supposed to happen, and I'm not accusing anybody of ever having done it. But listen, we got to be honest about some of these conversations. We have to have the uncomfortable conversations. We want to change behavior. We want to teach new police officers how to do it better. We want to teach some older police officers that may have picked up bad habits and not been corrected, how they can do better. And even officers who are doing a good job and learning and reading books and attending training. Listen, knowledge is the enemy, right? I mean, like thinking everything and can't possibly learn anymore gets in the way of doing a good job. And so that to me is one of those pieces, is that just focusing on, like you said, simple task of writing a good, clean, accurate report, it matters.
You're right. So one of the, and this is what I love talking to guys like you, because you're dialed in to the same mindset, and that's tactical and technical proficiency. And for those that are unaware, because maybe you're not a police officer or you're not police adjacent in your friend groups, and so you don't hear these things. It's not that he put Phil Smith when it was Bill Smith and Bill McDonald when it was Phil McDonald. We all understand that these errors occur. But what the defense attorneys tend to use this information for is to create doubt in the jury. And if they create doubt in the jury that this officer made a mistake on something that was clear and present in front of them, and usually in the CAD notes or the call notes, or there was other things like identification cards or anything else that lends itself to being like concrete in front of them that they only had to write it down in front of them. If they made a mistake on something that was so avoidable, where else did they make a mistake? And it's just creating doubt and casting shadows on the quality of work overall that the officer did. So if you're a new officer and you're watching this or you're hearing this, Joe's right on top. You have got to be dialed in. You have a computer, you have programs like Grammarly, even um, text to speech things where you can just go ahead and do yourself a favor and front load the hard work and then go and clean it up. You just have to be clean and meticulous and do the little things well so that the hard things come easy. Joe, I think we're gonna hit a time barrier. I do want to have you back at some point because I'm halfway through the things I wanted to talk to you about. So that
That's
means that
probably
I've
because
got
I
another.
talked too long, brother. I
No, no,
apologize. I
no.
get
I've learned so much, but like just a couple of other pieces. Like, so not only does he have 24 years as a New York State Trooper, he did negotiations, he did a polygraph, he did all of these innovative and creative training mechanisms for cops to be better and to be, a good cop has a great community because they're intentional with their actions and they have community support, which is police legitimacy. And these are the kind of things that we want to see go from sea to shining sea. And other things that I noticed on your website, and I'll actually, let me pull it up now. And I'll is if you look through here and just read some of the stuff that he's done and he's accomplished, it's there's a guide for investigations that can be used for cops. Like, look, as a cop, you have a million things: the law, your policies and procedures, officer safety, community safety, the suspect's behavior, witness and behaviors. All of these different things come into play, and then uncontrollable variables like cars flying down the road. Having a checklist or a tool that allows me to be consistent and checklist provides success. There's a reason why pilots have a pre-flight checklist. It's so they don't forget anything. Because how bad would it be if somebody forgot something at 35,000 feet? Catastrophic, right? The same thing is true when you're trying to put away a violent criminal that has victimized a community or an individual, and they get set free because you failed to do something that should have been a no-brainer. So these are just some of the things that you can learn from Joe, and so I think it's great having him. And I'll make this full screen so that you can see it. But go to advancedstrategiccommunications.com. It will be in the notes so that you can find him. Joe, where else can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So if you search my name, Joseph Auriemma, you'll find me on LinkedIn, and also some social media platforms, Instagram. I'm posting videos and whatnot. But the big one is my website, and then followed by LinkedIn. And I just want to say one last thing, Brad, if I could. To the listeners out there, those people that want to use these skill sets, whether it's private or public sector. What I tell my students when I'm teaching is you never want to find yourself in a fair fight. Right? Your skills, your prowess, your planning and preparation need to far exceed your opponent. And your opponent is the people you're interviewing, the world in which we work in, right? It is extremely important that as professional police officers and professional interviewers that we understand that this requires training. It requires a hands-on use of this information, from de-escalation on traffic stops to interviewing victims of crimes, witnesses, and suspects. You need to be training. So whether it's myself or other agencies, Brad, you have so many great people coming on your podcast that have all these wonderful skills to learn from. Your viewers should be reaching out to these people, and never put yourself in a place where you think, hey man, I'm good. I'm still learning to this day, and finding new ways of not only teaching things, but myself, speaking to people. So keep learning, keep this profession professional. Let the haters, hate, but let's show them that we actually do care, and we are trying to do the best we can for the citizens and the communities we patrol and protect. And I'm here for anybody that wants to reach out. Further questions, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email, joseph@advancedstrategiccommunications.com, and happy to answer any questions or offer any advice whenever I can. Appreciate you having me on, Brad.
Yeah, no problem. And so, Joe, thank you so much again for your time today, your expertise, your knowledge and experience. There's something for somebody. Actually, there's something for everybody out there to learn. And I can't wait to learn more from you as we develop this professional relationship. So, again, if you are in law enforcement and you want high speed, low drag, quality, hands on training that's going to stick, that isn't going to just get you through the post test, but actually stick, reach out to us via our website at getsafeusa.com or getsafeuniversity.com, through Instagram or LinkedIn, or you can just email me at brad@getsafeusa.com. And what we'll do is we get you plugged into a regional de-escalation center, and then they pay for you to get training, meaning that all you have to do is show up and spend 8 hours with me or one of my instructors, and you have a great time and you walk away with skills that you can use on the job and at home, because people are people regardless of the clothes they wear, so they tend to act the same way and have the same needs and the same drives. So with that being said, that's for law enforcement. If you're in a company, whether it be a hospital, a bank, or a school, or whatever it is that you work and you want violence prevention or de-escalation training, contact us because we have a program specifically for you. It's broken into three different courses: one that's a basic for 1 hour, a 2 hour intermediate, and a 4 hour, which is the best value advanced, that covers everything, including hands on stuff and demonstrations that let you walk away feeling comfortable about your safety in your space. So, thank you very much. I appreciate you for watching this today, and we will see you next time.